So welcome everyone to the Greene County Leaders April 2021 session on Leadership Legacy. Welcome to those of you who are Greene County Leader alumni and those who are joining for a taste of Greene County Leaders. We're so glad you're here. So I'm Victoria Solomon. I'm the Community Resource Development Educator with Extension Greene County. And Cara Carper is the executive director with Greene County Development Corporation. I also want to give a special recognition to Greene County Leader Board members. I know we have a number joining in on the session today. So if it works for your internet to turn on, if it works for your video to turn on, please do so. That would be fantastic. We definitely don't judge backgrounds. Kids and pets are more than welcome to join. And recognizing it is the lunch hour, you're more than welcome to have a lunch during this session. So in the chat, let's do some quick introductions so we can get to know each other. I'm going to put some more information about myself in the chat. And if you can do so as well, that would be fantastic. I know we have some new folks joining. And a special welcome to you. We are so glad you are here. I want to do a quick introduction to Greene County Leaders. So the purpose of Greene County Leaders is to help build leadership skills, deepen understanding of community issues here in Greene County communities, and provide opportunity to create and expand community networks. This program is possible through a partnership with UW-Madison Division of Extension Greene County and Greene County Development Corporation, with strong support from lots of businesses and organizations across Greene County. Today, we're digging deep on leadership legacy. We'll start with an engaging session with Sarah Schlosser, Organizational and Leadership Development Outreach Program Manager with UW-Madison Division of Extension. Sarah will provide lots of opportunity for learning, reflections, and breakout group discussions. We'll also have a unique opportunity to hear from community leaders Mike Sanders and Marion as they interview each other and have dialogue about their personal reflections, learnings, and intentionality when it comes to taking action on building leadership legacies. I'm so glad that we're taking time to reflect on this topic. We usually have a session on this in Greene County Leaders, and I know I've always learned a lot from it. It is absolutely essential to take time to reflect on this, to learn and grow. And I'm going to share quickly a bit about my experience in this learning that brought my attention to how real this is. So about 2 years ago, I had a very unexpected, very serious cancer diagnosis and was told I had about 3 to 5 years left. And that changed how I think about life and the impact that I have. It made me think about things very differently and try to grow to be much more intentional. It has made me really reflect on how we live with knowledge and resources and in communities shaped by those before us, and how the decisions we make shape the lives and experiences of the generations after us. I have been extremely blessed and privileged, and a lot of people have dedicated themselves to researching cancer. Those who passed on due to this cancer decided that as part of their legacy, they were dedicated to helping those of us whom they hadn't even met, and that way we would have a chance. In my situation, I have been able to go through specific treatment with lots of tests, surgery, lots of rounds of radiation, and over 100 days of chemo. So my cancer is now in remission. And in 7 years, I have a chance of being a survivor. Because I've been going through what I've been going through, I am significantly more aware of the importance of intentional leadership legacy and legacy in action, because this is very, very real. So this really made it clear to me that reflections on leadership legacy are essential and valuable and meaningful. I'm glad we're taking the time together today to reflect and learn more. So with that, Happy to introduce my colleague and friend, Sarah Schlosser, who will be kicking things off today. Sarah is the Organizational and Leadership Development Outreach Program Manager with Extension, and prior to her current position, she was the Director of Leadership Wisconsin, and before that, she was the Community Resource Development Educator in Greene County and one of the founding members for this iteration of Greene County Leaders. Welcome, Sarah.
Great, thank you, Victoria. And it's so fun to see faces. Occasionally I make it down there, and I always love when Victoria and others invite me to just reconnect with my roots and where I started a lot of my leadership work. I was joking, a few of you might have heard, so Kriss Wellington is hiding in the background there. She's got some things she's doing, and I didn't know that she was going to be here. And so a little pressure on me here, because I've adapted a little bit of her work that she did a couple of years ago for Greene County Leaders. I also, in addition to adapting some of Kriss's session, I have drawn a lot on Simon Sinek, and Simon Sinek wrote the book Find Your Why, and we'll post this in the chat later, but I have found his work to be very accessible, and sometimes when we talk about topics like leadership legacy, it feels like, okay, how do I even begin? What do I do? And so I'll be sharing some of the strategies that I found useful for myself when I worked on my own legacy. So what is a leadership legacy? Victoria did a great job of talking about how it affects, it's what you do that affects others. And so the legacy you end up leaving is about who you affected, who you impacted, and how you impacted them. And we can, undoubtedly we're going to do that, whether we do it intentionally or not. When we stop and think about our legacy beforehand, though, we can be much more intentional about that. We can reflect on who has influenced us, who has impacted us, and how do we want to do that for other people. And so by thinking about our legacy ahead of time, instead of looking back and thinking about it, by looking forward, we can actually clarify what's important to us. And we'll talk a little bit about some of our values and what grounds us. And when we're intentional about that, we can make choices. I'm guessing many of you are pulled in a lot of directions, asked to do this or that, or help with this, or support someone here or someone there. And it can get a little bit overwhelming. And when we have a legacy, when we've articulated that for ourselves, it helps us make choices that keep us focused on what we're trying to accomplish. It can also help us expand our perspective. So often we're so busy looking at what's right in front of us and dealing with that. Stopping and think about our leadership legacy allows us to step back and look at that whole landscape and, again, be intentional. So I am going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. And I'm going to, once I get this loaded, I'm going to invite you all to, if you are comfortable, to rate yourself or sort of show us where we all are on this spectrum about articulating your leadership legacy. We anticipate that some of you haven't even begun, and then others of you maybe feel that you're already living that legacy. So if you want to go up, if you're not familiar with Annotate, you can actually go up, put your cursor towards the top of the screen, and a panel will drop down, and you can see a button that says Annotate. And when you click on that, you can select a stamp or anything you'd like to go ahead and indicate where you are at. All right, so we're getting people. I was anticipating this when Victoria and I talked, that we would see people across the spectrum, a few who, gosh, I really haven't even started to think about this. And I see we've got people creeping towards that living their legacy. And my guess is a lot of us would have a hard time saying we're living it until we get sort of towards the end and go back and say, yeah, I lived that legacy. So this is good. And this will be really helpful when we get into our breakouts in a little bit, to have people with being at different stages of thinking about this. And so I'm going to go ahead and clear all of that. And oops, and annotate apparently as I clear it. Let me close that. All right. So imagine that you are on a boat and you're sailing the ocean. Now, I know this isn't a sailboat, but it was a great boat picture, so I thought it worked. So imagine you're on a boat, you're sailing the ocean. And if you do nothing, the natural movement of the water is going to end up ultimately taking you somewhere. It might take some time, you might meander a bit, but you'll end up somewhere. The question is not so much where will the water take you, but where is it that you actually want to go? And so when we're intentional about describing the leadership legacy that we want to leave, we're actually creating that map for ourselves rather than living by accident. And of course, sometimes it's nice to just float and see where you go. But rather than living by accident, we can actually embark on an intentional journey towards something. So there are a lot of names for what we're talking about today. We've framed it, it's been framed as leadership legacy. People also talk about it as their personal mission or their purpose, or as Simon Sinek uses the word why. Whatever term we're using, what we're really talking about is that when we look out there on the horizon, when we look at where we're headed, what is it that we're building? What is it that we want to see? Who is it that we want to impact? So I mentioned Simon Sinek, and I've got a small graphic here. I really draw on Simon Sinek's work. He does a lot for organizations, but also individuals. And he talks a lot about the way our brains function. And this golden circle talks about that. And so often, think about it, when you introduce yourself, you introduce with the what. My name's Sarah Schlosser. I'm the program manager for the Division of Extensions Organizational and Leadership Development Program. Or my name's Sarah Schlosser. I'm a mother of a 2-year-old, right? We frequently name the what. And the reason is it's easy. If someone says, what did you do? The answer is easy. But when someone says, why did you do it? We have to stop and think. And that's because that why question is actually speaking to our emotional selves. And that's what we want to draw on when we think about our legacy. It's what taps our passion and gives us fulfillment. So for me, and this is just one example, what a leadership legacy and why could look like varies from person to person. But for me, it's actually a collection of words. It's see, hear, lift up, and inspire. So my what, I'm a program manager in leadership and organizational development, but my why goes with me from job to job or organization to organization. It's seeing, hearing, lifting up, and inspiring. And for me, those words reflect that emotion and give me direction. So because really getting to think about our legacy, really thinking about what are our values and what do we want to embody and how we go about and how we choose where we spend our time and how we want to affect others. Our stories can help us do that. And just as a side note, that's my son, my 2-year-old son, Anwar, sitting in the rocking chair there. But taking some time to think about our stories. And this is again where I draw from Simon Sinek's work, really grounding ourselves in thinking about our stories. And so we're actually going to go through 2 different sets of giving you some time to reflect on your stories and then bringing you into small groups to share those stories as a way of starting to either refine what you've already begun for your legacy or start the process of that. On this particular screen, you'll see 2 questions, and I've given you 2, and you can choose whichever one resonates with you. So the first one, what was a time when you gave yourself to help someone else, after which you felt unbelievably good, like you'd done something that really mattered? The second question, what have you accomplished that you're really proud of? And so whichever of these resonate with you, I'm going to give you, and I'm going to set a timer and we're going to be quiet for 2 minutes and just give you 2 minutes to think about the answer. As you do that though, think about the story here, okay? So you're not answering my question in a direct way. You're thinking, What was that time? What was going on? Who was there? How was I feeling? How were my actions affecting others? So really think about that whole story, not just a simple answer. So before I give you some quiet reflection time, are there any questions? Okay. Well, I'm going to mute myself and set a 2-minute timer and let you reflect on whichever of these two you would like. All right. So I don't know, that 2 minutes could have felt really long to you, or it might have felt like it flew by. And if you're still jotting some things down, feel free to keep doing that. As I mentioned, our stories can be clues for us. And so what we're going to look at now on the screen, you'll see a list of values. This is not a comprehensive list by any means, just a way to get your thoughts going about what some words are that would represent values. Consciously or unconsciously, our values are driving the choices we make and how we go about our work. And what we want to do is be conscious and intentional about that, right? We want to elevate that and be really clear for ourselves about our values. So take a look at this screen and take a look back at any notes you jotted about your reflection on something that you did that you were proud of, or that just really felt good, and see if you can identify a couple values on this list, or ones you come up with, that are showing up in that story that you just reflected on. And as you do that, just jot 2 or 3 of those values down next to your story. All right. So what we're going to do now, and Victoria will give you instructions for the breakout room in a moment. I'll sort of tell you what you're going to do when you get in there. You're going to get in a breakout room with others. We'll give you about 10 minutes total for your group. And this is an opportunity to tell your story. So that story of something that mattered, or accomplishing something that made you proud. And while you're doing that, share where you're comfortable. Of course, only ever share what you're comfortable with, but share what personal values that story reveals for you. And so this is a chance not only to share that story, but in sharing it, it will help you to refine and think about that story more, as well as learn from the stories of others. And when we come back from our breakout rooms, we'll have, I'll give you a chance to just jot down anything that's come up for you and invite anyone who'd like to share any ahas or even questions that have been generated through your discussion. So with that, Victoria, I'll let you give instructions about the technical side of our breakouts.
Welcome, welcome everyone back to the large group.
Welcome. Yeah, welcome back. I'm just going to give you a second. Sometimes it's a little, I realize we're not actually moving. We're sitting in the same chairs, but we're still moving from room to room in our own heads. So just give you a few seconds to reground yourself. And if there's anything you want to take note of, I want to give you that space. So I'll just about 20 seconds here. And as you come back into our space, our larger space together, I do want to invite you to either in the chat or unmute. Are there any themes? And you don't need to retell your story or even tell anybody else's story. That's not what I'm looking for here. But like, is there anything that sort of came up for you, an aha, or any theme that you were sort of hearing across the stories that you'd like to share? Again, in the chat or unmute would be just fine.
For me, it was about how just one individual can impact a community, a state, or a region. I mean, it was amazing to see how impactful some of the lives on the call were to our community and even larger.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I think commitment was a key word as part of our discussions, and the commitment ran the range from commitment to raising children and then seeing grandchildren and the legacy involved with that, to the commitment of finishing difficult higher education, to Mike Fergal's commitment to individuals who needed support at critical times, and having the commitment to see them through it. And now years later, hearing and seeing the benefit of what was accomplished. So I think commitment's I think it's a very hot word these days, and different people define it as to expectations. But I think all our stories, the four of us, there was a commitment to not necessarily see something through, but to see it progress.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ron.
I think Tom made a good point in I think it was Tom, but it might have been Beth too, or all of us, but they made the point of, you don't always know that, it's going to affect things later, like things that each of our group members talked about. You just kind of have that faith that something's going to happen, and then you find out how long it takes. And there were various examples of that in the group, where you start something maybe when you're younger, and then, several decades later, you're like, we basically got there.
Yeah. Well, thank you for those of you who shared. It's great to hear that you're able to not just look at your own story, but hear some of those themes, because that can help you shape what you decide you want your legacy, your leadership legacy to be. I'll add the group I was in. One of the things was I was hearing people talk about things that were consistent across both their professional and personal lives. So it might look different in the professional setting or the personal setting, but that those core ways of being, those things that are those core values, were definitely showing up in both places. And I also heard about legacies that were connected to sort of people or sort of things in community, as was said before. as well as accomplishment of, building something, creating something bigger than. And so we can think about our legacy in a couple different, several different ways. So let's build on this. And I had those first questions was sort of reflecting on yourself in many ways. A lot of times though, when we shape who we sort of refine who we want to be, we're looking at others and we're saying, like the stories we shared, wow, that's such an accomplishment. That inspires me. And so when we think about the people who inspire us, let me get back to my screen here. When we think about the people who inspire us, that uncovers a little bit more about what we want our own legacy to be. So on this screen is someone Victoria knows very well as well. Maybe a few of you know. This is Joan Gilman. Joan is retired. She used to run the Madison Small Business Development, UW-Madison Small Business Development Center. And she is one of many, but one of my most prominent individuals who just inspires me. And I think about her legacy as an example for what I want to be. And so some of the characteristics when I think about Joan is she's this consummate coach, whether she's coaching small business owners or she's coaching friends on a walk around the neighborhood. She's always posing these really good questions that get you to think about why you're doing what you're doing, how you're going about that. And so that gets to focus. She has accomplished amazing things, and her legacy is the people she's touched as well as institutions and programs she's created. But it's always with a clear focus. She's really good at figuring out what can she affect. And so rather than trying to tackle something that's beyond her circle of influence, she really gets hyper focused and only engages in those things she can make a difference. And part of the way she does that is through building networks. She has she was in Texas and she was at a friend's house in Texas and ended up sitting next to someone who knew somebody who she knew. And it was like, this is the kind of thing that happens to Joan. She'll be in another country and bump into somebody who knows somebody who's part of her network. And that's something to do with about how she treats people, right? And how she gets to know them and understand them. And so she builds these bridges between people and ideas, and bridges that have connected work that goes on in Wisconsin with work that goes on in Croatia that has changed the lives of people across the globe. And so when I think about someone, this is what I think about as sort of someone who inspires the legacy that I want to create as part of my leadership. And so this is the next step, is for you to take a couple minutes and think about someone in your life that has helped make you the person you are today, someone who's inspired you, influenced you. And as you do that, again, think about the story. So I was hearing great stories in the breakout room I was in. Think about a specific time when they exemplified what you admire most about them. So I will give you 2 minutes to reflect on that silently. And I think we may have had a few people who had to pop out and join us. We're just reflecting silently on the question on the screen. Who's inspired us, influenced us, that we might begin to frame as a way we might want to lead. And we're just about at the 2 minutes. So as you're wrapping up that reflection, take a look again at the values words, and you can certainly pull from any other words you want to use, but jot down again a couple values that might be evident to you as you think about this person who's influential in your life. And it may be the same values or different values than you identified in your last stories. And we're going to go back into our same breakouts, and I will drop this in the chat, but you're going to go back in that breakout room and this time tell your story about who's influenced or inspired you and why. And so again, thinking about our legacy is part of our legacy will be being those inspirational leaders. And so looking at others to think about that for ourselves. So if there's no questions, we'll have Victoria send us back to those breakout rooms. That was such a weird comment to re-enter into. Pretty good for an old guy. I'm like, I need the rest of the front of that story. I want to give a little space again, just a couple minutes, if there's any reflections from your breakout conversations, and then we'll move into hearing two community members share about their leadership legacy. So I invite you to open in the chat or unmute again. Is there anything that came up as a theme or something you want to lift up to the broader group?
I don't know, we were too busy crying about our heroes.
Oh.
I heard in my group, and I jumped in a little late with them, but I heard, you know, that those folks who influence us, those heroes, they come in so many different places, right? That they are in our families, they're in our communities, they're in the organizations we work in, and that they may show up, they may be in all of those places, and that sometimes even those who influence us and inspire us the most are the ones who we think aren't getting it right. And that they become an example of the opposite of what we want to be or become as a leader. So I thought that was interesting. Well, with that, Victoria said that I had this great idea about having two community members share in a very unique way about their legacy. So I'm going to turn it over to Victoria and sort of build on this idea of hearing these stories about how we come to name and describe what we want our leadership legacy to be.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. Let's give her a virtual round of applause. Thank you for that session. It always makes me think a lot. I always think there's a lot to learn, and I know I definitely was taking a lot of notes. So like I said, I am super excited to dig into this topic of leadership legacy today. It is really powerful to learn from community leaders doing so much with so much intentionality. And so for our next part of the session, we have two very well-known community leaders sharing about their personal reflections and learnings. Our format for this is a bit different. We have asked each of them to interview each other, and you can put questions in the chat, and we can definitely have questions as well. So with that, I'm very happy to introduce Mike Sanders with 1,100 partners and a Greene County Leader alumni, and Kriss Marion with Circle M Market Farm. Mike and Kriss are both very well known in Greene County and seen in lots of places doing lots of things and making lots of positive impact. So my guess is you're both probably making intentional decisions about how you spend your time and energy. And so with this dialogue, this is a great opportunity for us to learn more about what drives you both and informs how you determine to spend your time and energy. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Well, it's my privilege to get to go first and start interviewing my friend Mike. Mike, we work together on some projects, so I know that you definitely have a life after the Monroe Clinic. But I'm curious what your group is. 100 partners? I don't actually know what that is. And I'm curious what you're involved with now.
Sure. Thanks, Kriss. And thanks, Victoria, for inviting us on. Legacy is a big word to kind of be a part of. It's a little embarrassing. And Sarah, good to see you. It's been a long time, but thanks for your opening presentation. That was really good stuff. Well, just briefly, what I've been up to, I retired from my kind of full-time job at Monroe Clinic at the end of 19, and 1,100 partners is it's a little healthcare consulting startup I'm doing with a couple former colleagues at Monroe Clinic. And so we're primarily working with rural hospitals. We have 4 or 5 clients that we're working with to help them address some of their issues in creating exceptional service and quality in those organizations. So this is about a half-time thing for me. If I wanted to work full-time, I would have stayed at Monroe Clinic, which is a great organization. But in the role I was at, it's a lot of hours, a lot of days, and it was nice to take a little bit of a break. But this also gives me an opportunity to share some of the experiences I've had and work with some people that I've really enjoyed working with over the years. So that's what that is. Some other things I'm involved in. It's interesting. I'm a small business person now after working at big organizations for my whole career. The other thing is 5-quarter construction. And this is a blast for me because I get to work with my son-in-law, who's a contractor and home remodeler, and my grandson, who is his nephew. So the 3 of us are in this little home remodeling firm. I know nothing about the technical end of it. I could do the paperwork and accounting, but they're the craftsmen. They're out doing that, and that's been fun to be a part of that. A lot of grandkid duty and family duty. We have 2 of our grandkids here in the other room. You might hear them. And so that's been a lot of fun to have that time available. I'm involved in a number of community organizations. Kriss and I are on the board of Fowler Dental, which is a clinic providing dental care to the kids and adults now who really have no access other places. I'm also involved in other community organizations, the Art Center, the school foundation, and different things that mean a lot to me. Kiwanis. And a lot of what I do is partnered with my wife. We're not necessarily in the same organizations, but we do a lot of things together. So she likes to throw parties, and sometimes we use those as fundraisers. And so it kind of works out all the way around. And just to make sure this word legacy doesn't go to anybody's head, one of my other legacies, and you all know what this is if you have pets. This is little poop bags. Yeah, well, we have a puppy in the house who doesn't know that food should only be eaten once. So we have, I know that's probably not good for Greene County leaders discussion, but so this keeps me humble. I'm out there making sure that there's nothing left on the lawn. So a little of this, a little of that, but all of that adds up to way less than a big full-time job, Kriss.
Well, I have learned so much from you being on the Fowler Dental Clinic board, and your knowledge of healthcare and the questions you ask, the direction you move discussions is really skillful and dexterous and wise. And I think it's great that you're staying involved and passing that wisdom on. I'm curious, what got you into healthcare? What was a pivotal thing that led you in that direction?
Yeah, I've thought about that for a long time, and I'm not really sure what got me into healthcare beyond the idea of it's something that has a big impact on community, and that was always attractive to me about healthcare. Actually, my undergraduate degree is math, so that's not so healthcare related. But then I went to graduate school in public health, and that. And the other thing is, I'm from a big family. I'm one of 8. My wife is one of 10, and there's a lot of cousins there, nephews, and if you go across the spectrum of our family, and both families are pretty close, we've had a lot of challenging things. We've had a lot of great things and a lot of successes across that family, but we've also lost 2 nephews to drug overdoses. We have a close family member who's in prison. There's been a lot of strife too, and you get closer through those things and help each other out, and so I feel like I have a feel for a broad spectrum of what's going on in the world, and then healthcare. I just never regretted that for a minute. Always being part of an organization that was mission driven, where your work, and all of us have a chance to contribute to the community regardless of what work we do. But I had sort of a double dip because I could do it at my day job and then in volunteer work too.
I've heard you use the term mission driven a lot, and I really appreciate it. And I do think it's a great privilege to be involved on a large scale with those kind of projects. Are you living near your family? Where does most of your family live?
Well, I grew up in Michigan, Detroit, Flint area. Actually, my parents are from Racine, but then my dad worked for GM his whole career, so we're Michiganders. But we're very fortunate. Our immediate family, we have 2 daughters. One's in Monticello, one's in New Glarus. So 5 of our 6 grandchildren live in Greene County. So that's a blessing that we never had when our kids were young. We were always 5, 6, 8 hours away from grandparents. So we don't want to miss taking advantage of that. And so it's fun to do things. It's been a little stifled this past year, obviously getting out, but I was able to volunteer at the health department vaccination clinic with my 16-year-old granddaughter. And that was just so cool to be able to do something like that. It's just a little thing, but it's a double thing, teaching about community service, but also doing things with your family, which was great. And I'm looking at the screen here. We had the question earlier about inspirations, and I see so many people that have had a big impact on my life, particularly since we've come to Monroe. It's hard even to say, but Ron Spielman's right there, and he's been a big mentor and role model for me in terms of commitment to the community. Kriss Wellington, Beth Kinchy, the work she's done tirelessly for decades, and many others. I hate even to say some others that come to mind. Monsignor Campion, who's left us, George and Kay Berry, who were huge pillars of this community, and so there are so many great examples, and we can all be examples to others too, because I don't know that people necessarily grow up learning all this stuff. You just dig in and do, or knowing it, you dig in and do a little bit and find out what you really enjoy and get positive, good feelings from, and then do more of that. I know it's not very eloquent kind of formula, but it's been good.
Well, I think there's no doubt that when you look at the people on this screen and you think of opportunities you've had to work with them, that working in community on improving community is so addictive. You get a little taste of it and you just want more. And that's probably what legacy is all about, that you let your addiction get wild.
Yeah, and I was sharing a story in the breakout group that I'll share quickly here, and then you're going to be on the spot here, Kriss. But the first kind of thing I ever got involved in that was a bigger community type thing was when I lived up in Appleton before we came here. This was back in the early 90s. And we were very involved in kids things. That was our first volunteer stuff: coaching, fundraising, den leader, that kind of stuff. And then our kids were very involved in soccer, and the Appleton area ran out of space to house games, and there were no Little League fields anymore. It was awful to try to schedule. So some people in the community got together and said, well, we're gonna build a sports complex, and just find some space, plant some seed, get this going. And it was a $4.5 million project. And somebody asked me to be on the fundraising committee. I ended up being treasurer of this organization, and it was something I'd never ever done before. And then I found myself going to the, Kimberly Clark headquarters, talking to the CEO. Thrivent was based up there then, and we raised this money. And I never thought I'd be doing something like that. And the person that asked me to do it was a guy who had no kids in any of these programs. He just saw a need in the community. So there was nothing sort of in it for him in a way, a personal thing. It was just like, hey, there's work that needs to be done. Let's get some people and do this work. And that was very inspirational to me, that this guy put in a ton of time and brought others into the picture, and we got lots of people involved and made good things happen. So it was a memory that is very close to my heart as I think about how other things happen and have seen things happen here.
Mm-hmm.
So Kriss, how did you get to Greene and Lafayette County? I know you're not from this area originally. Maybe a little bit of backstory there?
Yeah, I have an interesting origin in Wisconsin story, and it has to do with my health. Interestingly, I was living in Chicago after college, had my children, my 4 kids were born there. And I really enjoyed Chicago. We had a building that we rented out. I had a full life. I was in a bunch of bands, and started to have a lot of symptoms in my joints, and eventually got diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, and was probably not bedridden, but very much laid up for about a year while I was trying to figure out treatments. And while laying in bed, I was reading a lot of Wendell Berry. And have any Wendell Berry fans out there? And
a few, yeah.
What?
I saw some hands going up.
Yeah. And I grew up in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, which was very rural at the time, and surrounded by green and farms and cows and streams. And I had fought to get to Chicago my whole life, to get to the big city. But when I was laying in bed, I started to long for those green spaces and those healing places. And my husband never really loved the city as much as I did. And we moved to Blanchardville because we found Blanchardville on the internet. And I could tell that there were 4 bars and there were bands that played in the bars, even though it was a town of 825. And I thought, I can live in this place. It looks awesome. And we just looked around, found this beautiful farmhouse, and it really kicked off a tremendous period of healing for me. I was off all my drugs in 2 years. Wow. And so I'm those of you who know my public life, I'm fiercely committed to water quality and small scale agriculture and just small town living. And that's why, because this small town and this valley and this green gave me my life back.
Well, that's amazing. And for all of you here, I only knew a very little bit of that story. So thanks, Kriss, for sharing that with everyone. So how do you pick it seems like you're in everything, doing all, the things you just listed. Then also, I know you're in public office and you've run for public office, which, my hat's off, and thanks to good people who run for public office. That's a very, in many ways, thankless work. But what gets on your schedule? What's the criteria that gets things on your schedule?
Well, I'm not great at this. And I think this is a really important session to have, because thinking through where you want to put your energy is a really big question mark. And I struggle with that, because I'm a can-do kind of girl. I feel like if I could pass on any legacy, it would be communicating to my circle and to a wider circle that if you see things that need changing, you can change them and that you should be willing to jump in, take off your shoes, but get in and get your clothes all wet and just get into the middle of things, because people do make change. One person can have a tremendous influence on their circle and on their community. And I like to make change. And I like to hang out with people like you all who are in business of making change. I really like people like you. So, I do have a grandson who lives with me now. I'm moving into grandparent world. I have another child who's due in a couple months, and that has, it causes you to reevaluate some things. I don't have a puppy, so that's nice, Mike.
You want one?
No, I have a bunch of dogs, but I don't have a puppy, so I'm at least not picking up poop all the time.
Yeah.
I think it's hard, and I think the work of examining your values and taking time to do that. I'm hoping it doesn't go off, but I have an alarm on my phone that goes off 3 times a day that tells me to drink and meditate. And I think it is useful to just take a couple minutes, a couple times a day, and think about where you're at, be thankful, and just see if you're in the flow of the place you want to be. That's on a really micro scale, but I think it's good to examine where we're putting our energy, because we are finite, which really bugs me, but we are.
Yeah, Kriss, I was going to ask you, what can you teach us about exactly that question? Saying, I hate even to say this word, saying no occasionally, or maybe it's not now, but later, or how, what can you teach us about that? Because that, I know we all have various versions of that all the time in our lives.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think my husband would say I am the wrong person to ask. But I think, again, I think just reflection. Those of us who are doers, I think maybe struggle with reflection a little bit. And classes like this, cohorts like this, being accountable to a larger group of people who are working in community together. I think it's good to have people around you who say, is this where you want to be putting your energy? Why does this thing work for you? I think having people that you're in dialogue with, because I think sometimes we get so caught up in the things we really care about that it's hard to have that perspective. I am not great at it.
As you kind of implied, many of us get spouse assistance with that, even without requesting it sometimes. And, a couple of thoughts I'd add about this commitment to community piece is don't be afraid to ask for help. And I look at a lot of the things I'm involved with, it's because somebody picked up the phone and said, hey, Mike or Nora, my wife, do you think you could help us with this? And, for me, sometimes I probably wouldn't have picked up the phone and said, hey, I want to dive into this. Some things I have, but some we haven't. And some, so people never say yes if they're not asked. So don't be afraid to ask. And don't be concerned if people say, no, not, it's not for me, or this isn't the right time or whatever. Right. And obviously you can do more with partners. Moving forward, a team approach. The other thing is thank yous go a long way. So, I know there's several quotes about, people can live a month on one thank you or compliment. And so those are easy to give. So people that are with you on the journey, be sure to tell them how much you appreciate it. And when you hear that in reverse, say thanks. It's great to hear. Don't try to deny it or say, oh, that's not me. It's those compliments or thank yous feel good both ways, giving and receiving.
I think you're right. And I think some of the art of thanking people has to do with having enough margin in your schedule to spend time writing those notes, making those phone calls. For a while, I had a sticky note on my computer that was kind of buckets of things to do each week. And one of them was communicate up with somebody, right? Like looking at your path forward or aspirations you had, make sure you're reaching out upward, and then reaching across, making sure to communicate with some people who are partners and peers, and just build that good bank account kind of relational work. And then also reaching back to people who are coming up and making sure that you're always intentionally mentoring people. I will say in our communities, I think we struggle with mentorship and succession plans for the good things that are happening. Many of us are in volunteer groups that are chugging along. We have some powerful people involved, and it's easy to forget that they're not going to be around forever. And so the reaching to bring new people in is a really important thing that we don't do enough of, I think. And like you said, Mike, just asking people to get involved, because a lot of people aren't going to get involved in a club or even a philanthropic organization unless they're asked. We all like to be asked. And
I know we're about, oh, go ahead, Kriss. You had one more comment?
Something I've been pondering lately is the diversity, equity, and inclusion piece. You know, in our volunteer groups, we will see a different gift mix and a different diversity mix if we are intentionally asking other people to get involved, which might take us out of our comfort zones. And if you look, a lot of people are on a lot of boards, and that's because a lot of people know a few people to ask on to be on boards.
Yep. Victoria, can I take 30 seconds to tell one little wrap-up story?
Of course.
Okay. I know you all don't see it, but we're getting the countdown here. And this has nothing to do with me. But more, I want to share a story of my wife's. And she, for a few years, was a big sister in Big Brothers Big Sisters. And she had a little sister who had a brother who couldn't get a match. And so she worked with Kristen and the Big Brothers Big Sisters folks. Said, well, can I take both of them? You know, she just said, I'll take the sister and her brother. And so for about a year they did that and whatever. And so life went on. Maybe 10 years later, it was Christmas Eve at our house. And I'm going to have a hard time telling the story. We had all the family over and the phone rings, and we don't usually answer the phone when everybody's over, but it just seemed odd, a Christmas Eve call. And this was pre all the spam calls that we all get now. And so she answered the phone, and it was this kid who was now a policeman in some city in Florida. And he called to thank Nora. It was like, I just want you to know that made a big difference to me. Merry Christmas. I don't even know how he had our number. I mean, there had been this was not like passing Christmas cards for years or anything. It totally came out of the blue. And so kind of the last message, you never know how what you're doing is impacting people. And it's always in more ways than you know. And little things today become big things for others. And so be like Nike, just do it.
Right.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. I absolutely enjoyed and appreciated that conversation. I just want to do a check. Does anyone have any questions for Mike or Kriss? I know Becky.
I like Becky's comment. That's a great
Yeah.
way. Yeah, I can do that, but this is what I need to make it happen. I think that's an excellent way to say it, or it's sort of a yes and kind of thing. I think that's a great approach.
Yeah. Any questions or comments for Kriss or Mike? You can unmute or put in the chat. Okay. Kriss and Mike, thank you so much for sharing. I majorly appreciated that, and I know I learned a lot, and I'm confident I'm not the only one. So thank you so much for sharing. Let's give them a virtual round of applause for appreciation for everything that you've
Well,
shared. Thank you
thanks for the
so much.
opportunity. Thanks, Kriss, for not being too hard on me.
Always great to hang out with you.
And
Good to
Amanda,
see everybody.
great comment in the chat. Thank you. So in Greene County Leaders, as you probably know, we always look at what were some of the big learnings from today. So I'm gonna open this up, and we're gonna have this conversation. Would a couple people be willing to share what are some of your big learnings from today? Was there something new or something that will uh, sort of stick with you, or one thing that you might do as a result of today? I know I have a lot of notes, but I really appreciate all the things shared about how much it is possible for one person in community, in their circle, to have influence, to have positive influence. And I think I will always remember, Mike, what you shared about that call on Christmas. Um, that's really powerful. Anyone else willing to share some big takeaways? Hey, Ron.
Yeah, a couple things. Mike's point about saying thank you. You can never say it enough, and you can never say it fast enough. And uh, an expression I learned a long time ago was gratitude is attitude. And I think that when you say thank you, you want the donor, the giver, the contributor, you want them to feel the genuineness of your being appreciative of it, not the rote or automatic long letter. And so I encourage everyone to, and it's not just about money. It's when somebody has done something for you, with you, collaborated. Think about that email, that note, whatever you can do. And then the second piece is, and I think I heard it once or twice today, is intentional legacy. When I've talked with the Greene County leaders before and participated in legacy discussions, the key point, I think, especially with younger people, is you don't understand. You don't have to start out to have a legacy, but you're probably going to have one, and the legacy may not be what you're proud of. And so you think about the consequences of what you do on a daily basis, whether on the job or whether as somebody trying to assist in your community. And if you are a leader, I don't think you can take the path that it's not my job to be a role model. If you are a leader, you are a role model. And so don't let the non-intended legacy become your legacy. I'm done. Thank you.
And can I add to that too, Ron, and say that I think that both Mike Sanders and Kriss Marion exhibit this quality of humility, and you could tell that in everything that they said. Humility is a vehicle for legacy because people look up to other people that they hold in high regard, but that remain humble throughout that. And humility becomes a vehicle then for us to give our very best to the community, our very best side. I love that. I worked very closely with Mike Sanders for a while, and I have to tell you, I've never met a more humble leader, and he taught me so very much. And I know Kriss is the same way. So humility is a great quality for legacy.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That is fantastic. I also see in the chat there's a message from from Becky about legacy is a slow burn. And Marion just shared a quote from Jane Goodall. You cannot get through a single day without having an impact in the world around you. What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. Kriss, thank you so much for sharing that, because that uh, I don't know if you meant this, but that quote makes me think of what you were sharing about intentionally taking time to sort of pause and think about that, and that is fantastic. Any other learnings or comments people want to share about this session today? Any takeaways? Okay. Well, huge thank you, Kriss and Mike. That was really fantastic. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Even though it's April, we have a
I gotta
number
get
of.
back to work.
Oh yeah. Okay.
I gotta get back to work.
Keeping it real. Keeping it real. That is fantastic. So even though it's April, we have a number of exciting opportunities that are coming up that I want to be sure to share. So we have 2 more sessions in April with the Leadership and Government mini-series. One is tomorrow night. That's effective communication with the local officials. That's tomorrow evening. If you are interested in learning more about current challenges and opportunities that Greene County is facing, this is going to be a great session for you. This session will include connecting with Greene County board members and for updates on Greene County, as well as meeting with a number of Greene County department heads to connect about departmental updates. On April 29, we have a special session. It's going to be about connecting with state and federal elected officials. And so it's going to be really unique. This will be an opportunity to connect with state and federal elected officials that represent Greene County and Wisconsin. So those offices include U.S. Senator Tammy Baldwin, U.S. Senator Ron Johnson, U.S. Representative Mark Pocan, Wisconsin Senators Mark Line, Urbanbach, and Ringhand, and Wisconsin Representatives Novak, Pope, and Spreitzer. I just do want to share Greene County Leaders is nonpartisan, so this is for educational and networking purposes only. And so for more information about this, I'm going to put a link in the chat if you want to look into this further and to register. In May, we have a very special session with Braver Angels focusing on skills for bridging the divide. And this is a great opportunity to learn and practice skills for having more respectful and productive conversations with people from different perspectives. This is not at all about changing perspectives on any policy. It's about having effective civil conversations. So if you think in the US, in Wisconsin, in Greene County, we can do better when it comes to having civil conversations, this is a great workshop. I'm going to put the registration information in here. And if you haven't heard about Braver Angels, it's a national organization. They're kind of a big deal. We're really fortunate to be able to partner with them to do this workshop. So the registration information is in the chat if you want more information about that. And finally, we really appreciate your perspective on Greene County Leader Sessions. So later today, I will send out an evaluation survey. It only takes a couple minutes, and we really appreciate your perspective. We'll follow up this session with an email next week with additional resources and information, and that will also be shared on our website. With that, thank you so much for joining us. It is always a joy to be in community with you.